welcome everyone. This is Peace Talks, where we have brave conversations with leading activists who are doing the work of pursuing justice and peace in the midst of a world that is groaning. These are well-formed men and women who are inspirational to us, and we hope they will be for you as well. My name is Vanessa Sadler. I'm here with Bishop Todd Hunter. Todd, it's good to be with you.
It's good to be with you. And even though we're only getting to know each other, we're soulmates. I don't know can I tell people this, that we were both catchers?
Oh, yes, of course.
And so we know these signs that no one else would know, so
we're calling in.
We got it together.
We've got it. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Gregory Thompson. Greg brings a lot of nuance to the conversation around racial justice, specifically in the area of reparations and a posture of more restorative justice.
Yeah, Greg's become a good friend. He's going to be the director of research for the center, and I'm looking forward to hearing him today.
Oh, fantastic. I have many, many questions for Greg, and I can't wait to get started. I know I'm going to walk away from this conversation enlightened and probably challenged. Yeah. So let's get started.
Yeah, let's find Greg. Hey, Greg, great to see you. Thanks for being here today.
Greg, it's so wonderful to be with you today. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. I'm glad to see you.
Well, I would love for you to start with maybe sharing a little bit about the justice work that you're involved in, and then some parts of your own personal story that led you to this work to begin with.
Sure. Thanks. So my vocation bears witness to a confused mind. I'm doing a lot of different things in terms of the race and equity space right now. Some of the listeners will know that I've written a book on reparations, which came out last year. And that's a good theoretical framework to understand everything I'm doing, which is really an expression of reparations, particularly this category called reparations of truth, where right now my work really revolves around public storytelling around African-American cultural history and trying to promote that history in places where it has been forgotten. So I'm the executive director of an organization called Voices Underground. And the language is taken from God's words to Cain in Genesis, where he said, "I heard your brother's blood crying out from the ground." And so the idea is that there are all these African-American cultural history stories that are just buried around us. And a lot of my work is to try to understand those stories and then work with communities to resurrect and tell them. So to that end, I'm building the National Memorial to the Underground Railroad. That's the kind of largest scale project right now. But in general, trying to promote African-American cultural heritage in this place called Chester County, Pennsylvania. So that includes, creative directing the Juneteenth Festival, opening a restaurant and cocktail bar based in the history of Black cocktail making, things like that. So, my work is generally around public storytelling and race, and I see it as an expression of reparations. In terms of my own story, how I got here is really a combination of autobiography, like personal spiritual autobiography, intellectual journey, and then what I could only really describe as cultural crisis. Autobiographically, I grew up in South Carolina. I'm the grandson of Klan members and great-grandson of Klan members in South Carolina. And I was aware most of my life of this very complicated racial situation in our community. But when I became a Christian in the 80s, it was during the kind of evangelical racial reconciliation movement. Some of that was expressing itself through CCDA. Some of it was expressing itself through Promise Keepers and things like that. So that was very much a backdrop, this notion of racial reconciliation. That was kind of the first step. But when I moved to St. Louis to go to seminary, I started working at a gospel rescue mission downtown. I was leading a 13-month men's residential program, which I had no business doing as a 23-year-old. But I was there, and I realized that all the people that I was working with were coming from the same neighborhoods. And that's the first time that I really began to understand the nature of structural issues. That I didn't have that language at that point, but there were things that were happening outside of personal intention that were more structural and systemic in nature. And that's the first time I really began to understand that. When I went to UVA and studied King, I did my PhD on Martin Luther King at UVA. I began to get language from him and from the Black church traditions and the Black intellectual tradition broadly conceived about what I was experiencing. And that really, really changed me. And over time, I began to realize, oh, wait a minute. I thought that, the real challenges to the gospel here were like secularization or, global capitalism or technology and, pluralization, things like that. And that's true. There are challenges in each of those. But it was really through King and through my decade-long study of African American cultural history that I realized the biggest missiological challenge that we're facing, in my view, is the American church's neglect of the racial apartheid that's happened here, and its support of that, and its unwillingness to really set its shoulder against American white supremacy as an idolatrous system. And so I was thinking that more and more and more, and then the Charleston shootings happened in 2015, and that's the cultural crisis that I was really referring to, where some of my African American brothers and sisters just came to me and said, "Dude, you're a white guy from the South who spent over a decade studying African American cultural history, and you're hiding out in this like big white church in University of Virginia, and you're not out here with us." And about 9 months later, I quit my job and have gone on this completely bizarre and wonderful journey to figure out what it means to be a part of this work. So that's sort of how I came to this moment that I'm in, such as it is.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. That is why you are here. That backstory is what makes it so great to be with you today. So a lot of people who know you would think of you as a thinker, a professor and a thought leader and an activist. But I know you enough to know that you're also trying to bring together something that's really important to us in the center here, and that is the intersection of justice and formation. So say a bit about what you do to keep yourself in this game. Like, how do you conceive of your own spiritual formation into Christ-likeness today? And then maybe has it morphed over the years, maybe since 2015 as you've gotten in the game, so to speak?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, because I actually think that's the most important thing, and without which I wouldn't really be in this space, to be honest with you. When I started pastoral ministry, it became pretty apparent to me that, in Eugene Peterson's words, nobody was really going to ask me if I was praying or what kind of like moral life I had. They just want to know if I had the goods to preach and lead and, whatever. And that terrified me, especially because a mentor that I had revealed that he had been a drug addict. He was a very successful pastor, but abusing opioids for a number of years, painkillers. And I just got really scared. Again, this was probably when I was like 30, 31. And I went to a friend of mine and said, I feel like I need to understand the model of the spiritual life that goes beyond like theological knowledge and the quote quiet time. And I don't know what it is. And I landed in the Benedictine tradition after about a year and a half of study. And so it was actually 11 years ago yesterday that I vowed into a modified version of the Benedictine rule, and began to order my life by morning, midday, and evening prayer and Sabbath and, manual labor and domestic labor and friendships and silence and things like that. And it's been, it's one of these it's like the most Protestant thing ever, right? It's like this elective thing that I'm just like doing on my own or with a community. But I realized that I was not going to make it. I believed if I didn't reorient my life, and I think it's that decision, that grace that was given all those years ago, that actually oriented me more and more toward this racial space. Because remember, at the heart of the contemplative life is the renunciation of control. And white supremacy is about the amassing of control. And so as I was being spiritually formed away from control and more towards movement into the God who is with the weeping, the more that I began to be not just intellectually opened up through King and Howard Thurman and W.B. Du Bois and, Fannie Lou Hamer and you just name it, Toni Morrison, the more I wasn't just being intellectually opened up through them. I was also being morally opened up through these practices to a life that is not my own and which I'm not in control. And I think that that's like really fundamental to the work of justice. And I'll say this, it was when I really studied James Lawson, who was one of he was from Nashville, who was working in Nashville for the sit-in movement, and realized that he was forming all these students from Fisk in essentially moral and spiritual practices as they were preparing for the Freedom Rides, as they were preparing for the sit-ins. There's a profound history of moral formation as a precondition for social activism. King was in that tradition, James Lawson, Bayard Rustin, John Lewis, of course, Gandhi was also a part of this. And I think that is It's been an interesting integration of the Benedictine past that I have with also this like James Lawson sort of social formation part of, and I think that that's part of what we have to do together.
So, Greg, say a bit more about that in this sense. If our dream comes true here at the center, we'll have an audience that includes young people who are maybe dipping their toes in issues of justice, and also some nuns and duns and skeptics. If you were talking to them, give them a rationale for why formation has to go with justice.
Well, remember what we're trying to form here is a beloved community. Okay, what we're trying to form is a culture where neighbors recognize one another as such and bring the bounty that we share and for one another's good. That's the vision. It's not just a transactional view of justice. Justice here is removing the obstacles to love and to flourishing. But in order to do that, you have to be the sort of person who can embody that and who can care about that in your own life. And I think that Lawson and King and Lewis and these other folks, Diane Nash, they were really onto something deeply important in understanding that you can only build an expression of what you are. and if we're just working in this transactional, punitive, angry sort of exclusively angry, I mean, I also am angry, just so we're clear, but an exclusively angry sort of movement of justice, then that's the kind of social order that we're going to get. But if we were to work into a community where it's about love of neighbor, about resisting obstacles to flourishing, if we're going to create the beloved community, we have to be people formed by love, and that is the only way that this works, in my view.
Yeah, you're speaking to something that I have come back to again and again, and that's this idea of Jesus in the pool of Bethesda, and this question of, do you want to be made well?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to be made well? Do you want to be formed from the inside out to do this work, to sustain this work? And to that end, you mentioned your book that you co-authored with Duke Kwon called Reparations. And as we kind of shift to talk about that a little bit, I'd love for you to give us a working definition. You guys kind of spell it out really plainly in the book, but in your own words, what do you mean by the word reparations?
Yeah, great. So it's not a pithy definition, so I'll just prepare you for that. The idea here is that American white supremacy, which is a social order, was fundamentally an act of theft. And that theft had three forms. That it stole the truth about who African Americans were and about what it meant to be a human being. It stole power, that is to say, not only bodily and psychological power, but also political and institutional power. And it stole wealth by extracting wealth from Black labor and also obstructing Black opportunities and efforts to accumulate wealth. So if we understand that what we're dealing with is a cultural history of theft, then the Christian question is, what does the Bible say about theft? What does the Christian tradition, ethical tradition, say about theft? Well, what it says is return. And as we begin to think about that, we looked at two stories. One is Zacchaeus. This is somebody who was culpable in a theft, who returned what he had stolen fourfold and gave half of his possessions to the poor. But also we looked at the Good Samaritan, and this is somebody who was not culpable, but came upon a theft that was wrought by somebody else and still gave what he had to return this person to wholeness. That is what we mean by reparations. So in short, reparations is a deliberate attempt to return the things that were stolen by white supremacy, namely truth, power, and wealth, through the ethic of restitution if you're culpable and the ethic of restoration if you're not culpable. But the idea is to do whatever it takes to restore those that have been harmed to wholeness. And that's what we mean by reparations.
I love that. And you've kind of alluded a little bit to that in the creative nature and reimagining what that can look like. And for you, that looks like storytelling, which is something that is near and dear to my heart. Just being able to tell the story and trace not only the history, the individual story, but the collective story as well. And so I'm curious, as you have kind of been uncovering more and more of these individual stories, the history that you've come from as the great grandson of a Klansman, where do you see those stories kind of fueling what you do, and why do you want them to be told?
Well, I think honestly, my movement into the storytelling was an assessment of, was really born of my own sense of what I'm good at and what I'm gifted to do. Meaning, I think that there are people who have very clear opportunity and calling to do restoration, reparative work with respect to power and with respect to wealth. And I'm also involved in those things. But my primary work is reparations of truth. And I think that part of what I saw when I was a pastor working, in pastoral ministry is that people just did not know the truth about their own history. They just did not know the truth of the cities in which they lived. And so they were acting out of this like blind instinct, defensive instinct. And I thought, like, if we could tell the truth and do it in a way that is compelling and beautiful and that transformative, then we could actually heal the American racial imagination. And so, I worked on stories in Memphis with respect to the sanitation workers, where we were working on the memorial there and restoration of Claiborne Temple. And the Underground Railroad is obviously the big project now. And the goal for that project really is to have this whole community, Chester County, Pennsylvania, which is like as significant to African American cultural history as, say, Selma or Montgomery. There's just no memorials here. To have this community realize that this struggle for freedom happened here, and let that act on them, let that change and shape the way that they view one another, their history, their land. And so that has really been the strategy for me, was to say, how do we get at the imagination where a lot of this is where a lot of the malignancy is harbored, and shift that imagination through storytelling. And that's how it's working for me. And you referred to my own story. I mean, yeah, that's a part of it. I'm trying to understand more and more of my own story. That said, I feel like the stories of white dudes like me are the ones that are most often told. And so a lot of my focus really is on working with my neighbors to tell other people's stories, because I think and build memorials to those stories, to actually re-narrate the American landscape in a more truthful way, so that when we and our children see these memorials, they'll shape how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
So, Greg, thinking of your time as a pastor, and just knowing the work that we've been doing together the last few months as we've been putting this center together, why do you think the church fairly regularly, I don't want to caricature here in a wrong way, but why do you think the church fairly regularly declines the invitation to deal seriously with racism? Seems like it should be right in our lane, but I see huge pushback.
So I think that's a great question, Bishop. And I think there are historical reasons for that. I think that the church, which I mean in this context, the largely white church in America is what I'm referring to when I'm answering this question. Because the fact of the matter is that the African American church has been a faithful source of resistance to white supremacy from the beginning, and so have certain other branches of Christianity that are more white in nature. I think of certain Quakers and certain Northern Presbyterians and Mennonites and people like that. But in general, the kind of WASP establishment has resisted this, and I think that there are historical reasons for that. This historic alignment of American Protestant Christianity with the Nationalist Project, and viewing the Nationalist Project as an expression of Christian mission. And I think Willie James Jennings' book, The Christian Imagination, is like the gold mine on this, how there's this sort of imaginative structure that is historically mediated here, where churches have just come to believe themselves to be representatives and stewards of a nation in a certain way. And that has led, unfortunately, to theological reasons, meaning I think a lot of our theology, and this is, in my judgment, beyond controversy historically, a lot of our theology has been shaped so as to support that historical imagination. And so there are people who are, sort of stewarding this not only historical but theological project, that have profoundly vested interest in not having been wrong, and having been on the right side of history. And I see that is a very, very deep pathology in American Protestant evangelicalism, especially. This need to have done it right and been on the right side and to be a part of God's mission, and to constantly make the real enemies exogenous to us. It's either the liberals or the Marxists, or it's the Russians, or it's the Chinese or somebody else. It's certainly not us. And so I think there are historical and theological and cultural reasons for that. But ultimately, I think that there are moral reasons for that. I think that this is a moral failure and a profound need by the, quote, thought leaders of the American evangelical church to be right and to believe themselves to be the ones who ought to be in discursive control of the way the conversation takes shape in America. And I think until they renounce that and repent of that and begin to lead people into an actually real world in which we're not actually right, in which we have to learn from the Black church and other people that have been resisting this pathology, that we're going to stay morally sick. And I think that I see it as Ralph Ellison saw it, as Frederick Douglass saw it. I not only see it because they saw it and told me. I see it as a form of moral blindness, and that is what, in my view, we're really actually facing.
So Vanessa, I'm wondering, as my friend, a Black woman, not only how do you hear Greg, but what's been your experience of feeling like the church hasn't been with you in this?
Yeah. So coming from the background that I come from, we talked a little bit about just being trauma informed. The word that keeps coming to my mind, Greg, is enmeshment. You know, when we talk about family systems, you're talking about Christian nationalism and the white evangelical church. Like there's this enmeshment. And what happens in a family system is that to perpetuate that narrative, I have to buy into a delusion myself. So when truth is being told to me, when truth is being communicated to me, either by an individual or from a community, then in order to reestablish that delusion and keep that narrative in play, I have to gaslight you, right? I have to make you think that you're crazy, that you're not seeing what you're actually seeing. And so until that sort of differentiation can occur, and we can separate out and tell the truth about each and what's going on and what caused the enmeshment to begin with, I think we're a little bit up a creek.
Yeah, I 1000% agree with that. Because remember, American culture, especially white Protestant culture, it's predicated upon denying something that you actually know to be true. Okay. The whole thing is predicated upon seeing something with your eyes and then saying it's not really that. Our, quote, Black people are in fact happy, et cetera, et cetera. All of these like mythologies that we've had to perpetuate. And again, I think that makes us very morally and psychologically sick as a community.
Greg, we're aware that you and your co-author, Duke Kwon, have gotten both pushback about reparations, but also questions. So let's set aside for this moment kind of cynical pushback and get at maybe the one or two biggest questions about reparations. The first one being, are you serious? Like, how can this be done?
Yeah, I'm absolutely serious. And to see how it can be done, all we have to do is look at our own national history. We have in fact paid reparations to slave owners. So if we're interested, there are some paradigms that exist within American culture. And let me say, I don't believe that what we're talking about is unmaking something that has been wickedly made. Absolutely. Like, it's not like we can wind the clock back. But what we can do is make meaningful investment and engagement towards recognizing a very real moral wrong, taking responsibility for that, asking what the consequences have been and how we can address those. This is the basic structure of the moral life, okay, on a day-to-day basis. So it's not like we're asking for some other thing. This is what we teach people to do every single day of their lives, whether they're 6 years old or, whether they've been married for 50 years. When you do something wrong, or when something wrong has occurred, you participate in redress. You take responsibility for it where it is yours to take responsibility for, and you work for the well-being of your neighbors. This is not a morally complicated case, okay? There are things that we do both as a Christian church. It's not morally complicated at all. Remember, our entire faith is predicated upon somebody who was not guilty taking responsibility to heal his people, okay? So this is not a morally complicated argument in terms of like Christian theology. I think it is just, and the fact that we treat it like it is simply a sign of sickness. It is. And so I'm not saying that there aren't any questions about execution and all that kind of stuff. That's where I actually think the really difficult stuff lies. But of course we're serious. We believe that he who knew no sin became sin so that in him we might become the righteousness of God, right? I mean, yeah, that's what we think, and we're just applying that to the social order. So yeah, we're absolutely serious about it, and I don't think America can ever heal from its racial past until the church takes responsibility for this.
Yeah, and to that end, in the contemplative practice, this idea of what's life-giving and what's life-taking, and being constantly drawing your awareness toward those things. And I'm curious for you, Greg, alluding again to the pushback that you've received, you and Duke, on your book Reparations. Number one, what keeps you in the game, and where have you seen really life-giving gains, individually and or collectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, this book is sort of a those who have ears to hear sort of book, and we knew that when we wrote it. And so I did, because I'm a realist about the depth of the hold morally, psychologically, culturally, economically of American white supremacist history and American exceptionalism on the kind of Protestant imagination. Because I'm a realist about that, I did not write this book with the expectation of persuading the stewards of that fantasy of of this vision. And with really one exception, I have not engaged them at all, because that is life taking, and I am trying to actually just do the work, get out here and do the work and build partnerships with brothers and sisters out here in different cities. And say people who are asking in good faith, hey, how do we do this? And how do we understand this and think about it? I got all the time in the world for that. Okay. And that is life-giving. And I think that's what we're doing. What I don't have time for, again, with one exception, is for these folks who are really not interested in this at all, but who seem to me to be more interested in showing that they are correct about these matters, and that showing that the real enemy is allegedly some critical theorist Marxist is coming to take over the world, and not the white supremacy that we've actually stewarded for these years. I don't have any interest in talking about that. And the reason is not because I don't think that those people deserve to be heard or whatever. It's just, I have other things to do. And I think that actually doing the work of reparations is important here. And not defending the idea of reparations to people who have shown zero evidence of caring about racial issues in our country in the first place. And I think that's actually the most substantive pushback that we've gotten, is astonishment that we weren't bowing to the epistemic control of the powers that be. I just am not engaging that because I'm not under their epistemic jurisdiction. You know what I'm saying? I have an actual stuff to do in this world. And I think that is, and I had to make and it's not like a intellectual decision. It's not even an emotional decision. It's a spiritual decision to say this community, this discursive world is not life-giving. It is a quagmire, and I'm not going into that because we have actually important things to do with our neighbors. And that seems to me to be a really important moral choice that we have to face. Are we going to let ourselves be distracted by these fake conflicts that are out there, or are we just going to say what we need to say and do the work that needs to be done and go forward? And that feels to me to be a moral choice that we have to sustain each other in on a daily basis.
Do you want
Epistemic jurisdiction.
I just keep hearing, do you want to be made well?
Yeah.
I can't get away from that. Like, that's what I hear just echoing in what you're saying, Greg, is do you want to be made well? And if you don't want to be made well, I don't have time.
Yeah.
I don't have time. I'm too busy.
Which really fits our vision here of trying to be formed well, trying to become a truly good person so that we can do the true good.
Right.
But I did not come to work today thinking I was going to hear the phrase epistemic jurisdiction. So,
but you know what it means, though, right? You got it.
Yes. It's a call for freedom away from the powers that be.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, we're so thankful that you're a part of the community of the center, and we like to end these episodes of Peace Talks by asking our guests a specific question. Where is God, or how is God mediating hope to you these days? In this big struggle, where are you finding hope?
And let me caveat that, because this doesn't have to be a large thing. It can be, watching bubbles, watch your kids blow bubbles. It can be art. It could be a person. It could be a song. It could be a book. It could be a sunset. Like, we're thinking really broadly here.
Yeah. Well, I'll probably answer it in two ways then. I think with respect to the work at hand, I am hopeful because I believe that God actually wants to destroy American white supremacy and all the harm that it has wrought. And I see him raising up people who care about that and who want to do it from all different kind of corners, and those people are finding each other. And I think it's beautiful. And one of the things that's been most exciting for me is once you get out of that kind of like echo chamber that I was describing a moment ago, that's like angry and victimized and self-righteous and punitive and all that kind of stuff. Like once you go, I am not doing that anymore. I'm going to go over here. There's all this life over here. There's all these like amazing, creative, hilarious, beautiful, self-giving people who don't have it all together, but who are trying to figure out how to do the thing that, to all of us seems obvious needs to be done, how to heal our communities from this longest standing apartheid in Western history. Like, I feel like that is thrilling. The way that has expressed itself for me is, I'm working in this food world and opening this restaurant, and I'm working with these chefs, and they're African-American chefs. And together, just the joy of putting a menu together that tells the story of African-American cultural history and commissioning the art. I've got an 8-foot tall portrait of Harriet Tubman painted as a medieval icon that I cannot wait to hang. Those small acts are bringing me like extraordinary joy and hope in this. And I really want to encourage the listeners to understand that this world over here that we've been talking about that is so like self-absorbed with its own rightness and victimization and blah, 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 it is just killing us. And if we could just like step away from that and follow Jesus into the margins here and make some food and tell the truth and welcome people into our home and put up new memorials and new paintings, that is going to bring us joy in addition to hope. And I think, and that seems altogether good to me.
Just come to the table, y'all. Come eat some food.
I'm with you.
I love that. Have you seen High on the Hog, Greg?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, when we get together in person, I mean, I am deep in this African American food waste world and conversation right now. I mean, for 2 years, I'm spending all this time reading, tasting, meeting with people, and that I think is a really thrilling horizon of this reparations of truth, because it's not only something that you see, it's something you put in your mouth, and you're creating sensory memories that actually bear witness to Black glory. That is power, and I can't wait to participate in that.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. God bless you.
We want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Peace Talks. To stay up to date on upcoming releases, follow us everywhere on social media.
And if you haven't done so yet, check out centerfjp.org and take the 10-day Deep Peace Challenge.
In closing, we offer these words from Dr. Martin Luther King.
Darkness cannot drive out darkness.
Only light can do that.
Hate cannot drive out hate.
Only love can do that.
Grace and peace to you.